The message came at 7:42 p.m. on a Thursday. No greeting, no introduction. Just her father's voice, measured and sharp like a business memo. Don't bother coming to the family reunion. We're cutting ties. That was it. 18 words. 18 syllables, if you counted the pause before he hung up. Sandra played the voicemail once more. Not because she didn't believe it, but because she expected to feel something bigger. Maybe anger, maybe heartbreak. But all she felt was stillness. Like a part of her had already been waiting for this moment. Like she had finally heard what she always knew deep down. Sandra was the youngest of 2 children. Her father, Jacob Desmond, built Desmond Ottawa from scratch. First as a mechanic, then a franchise owner, then the head of a regional chain. Her older brother, Larry, was the heir her father always wanted. Charismatic, wild, untouchable. And Sandra? She was the quiet one. The one who kept everything running smoothly behind the scenes. No praise. No spotlight. Just constant work. That night, Sandra didn't call back. She didn't ask why. She didn't even forward the voicemail to her mother, Jane, who usually stayed silent whenever business matters became uncomfortable. She simply texted her father 2 words. Understood. Then she opened her laptop, logged into a loan portal she hadn't visited in months, and did something no one in her family would have expected. She removed her name. Not out of anger. Not out of revenge. But because everything was finally clear. 2 years earlier, when the family business needed a $2.5 million expansion loan, the bank had asked for a second applicant with excellent credit. Larry was drowning in debt. Jacob didn't want to risk his own assets. But Sandra? She had perfect credit and a Harvard MBA. No one begged her. No one thanked her. They just gave her the paperwork and a pen. And she signed, because back then, Sandra still believed that loyalty would earn her a real place in the family. But sitting at her kitchen table now, with the voicemail playing softly in the background, she understood something else. They hadn't just cut her off. They had finally said out loud what they had been doing silently for years. And this time, Sandra was ready to finish the sentence for them. She used to think Jacob loved order more than anything. But over time, she realized it wasn't order he cared about. It was control. Jacob Desmond built Desmond Ottawa the same way he built their home. Brick by brick. Rule by rule. No room for softness. The garage always came first. The family came second, or even third. He had a saying, one he repeated proudly in front of employees and family alike. We don't hire outsiders. We raise replacements. That's what Sandra and Larry were to him. Potential successors. At least on paper. Larry was 3 years older, louder, and always a few steps ahead of responsibility. But he had charm. Confidence. He reminded Jacob of himself. So Larry got the praise. The second chances. The freedom to fail. Sandra got the clipboard. At 12, she was logging tire deliveries into QuickBooks. At 16, she was managing payroll at their third store during her spring break. She didn't ask for these roles. She was told. No thank yous. No explanations. Just the unspoken rule. Be available, be obedient, be tireless. Her mother, Jane, wasn't mean. She simply faded into her role. Hosting dinners. Folding papers. Smiling through meetings. Then later, she would gently pull Sandra aside and say, Your father's building something for us. Be grateful, sweetheart. So Sandra tried to be grateful. She worked hard, earned her MBA, and turned down a corporate logistics job in Chicago because Jacob said, family before ambition. He needed someone for the regional expansion. Larry, apparently, was working on vision. So Sandra focused on everything else. When it was time to fund a new headquarters, Sandra found the location, negotiated the lease, compared 6 banks, and got them a good deal with a fixed rate. But the bank wanted a second name on the loan. Larry couldn't sign. His credit was a mess. Jacob didn't want to use his own assets. So they handed the papers to Sandra. No big talk. No family meeting. Just a pen already uncapped. She hesitated for half a second. Then she signed. Because deep down she still believed that if she stayed loyal enough, useful enough, they would finally see her not as a backup plan, but as part of the plan. Of course, they never said thank you. They treated it like her duty. That was 2 years ago. Sandra had thought she was investing in a shared future. She didn't realize she was just making herself invisible. And if you stay quiet long enough, you start to believe invisibility means love. But it doesn't. It's just silence mistaken for peace. The first real crack didn't sound like shouting. It sounded like laughter. Larry's laughter. They were in a quarterly budget meeting, just Sandra, Larry, and Jacob. She had flagged a vendor invoice. It was duplicated across 3 months, totaling $12,000. A clear mistake, or so she thought. "That's from a friend of mine," Larry said, brushing it off like lint on his shirt. "Let it slide. He gives us good rates elsewhere." Sandra looked to her father, expecting at least a frown. A word. Anything. But Jacob didn't flinch. He picked up his coffee and said, "Focus on bigger things, Sandra. Stop acting like an outsider." That word, outsider, didn't just hurt. It sank into her bones. She wasn't some temp. She had overseen 4 site expansions. She renegotiated their fleet lease and kept payroll steady through 2 major supply chain issues. And yet, the moment she questioned something beyond spreadsheets, she was treated like a stranger. After that meeting, things began to change quietly. At first, Sandra's access to the company's back-end systems became limited. She could no longer log into vendor platforms. Then the financial dashboard changed to read-only. The company credit card tied to her name expired, and it was never replaced. Every time she asked about it, the answers were vague. Restructuring, they said. Temporary system changes. Or worse, don't worry about it. But Sandra noticed other things. Larry had a new standing desk. He took a company-paid trip to Las Vegas that was labeled as a leadership summit. And there was an office chair in his office that cost more than her first used car. Something shifted inside her. Not anger, at least not yet, but a quiet alertness. A whisper from her instincts said, "They are building a door for you, and it only opens one way." Sandra started keeping records. Copies of spending reports, meeting notes, and emails, especially ones where Larry copied clients but used her name. Every night, she organized these files into a private folder on her home computer. She named it Shadow Ledger. She wasn't sure what she was building, only that she had to hold on to the truth while it was still hers. One evening, Sandra reached out to Gladys Perry, a former classmate from law school. They hadn't spoken in years, not since Gladys helped her own sister get out of a messy divorce tied to a real estate partnership. Sandra didn't explain everything, just enough to ask a question. If a co-signer withdraws from a business loan, what happens? The pause on the line was telling. "It depends," Gladys said. "If you're not a guarantor and haven't been part of recent misuse, the loan can be reevaluated without your name. Quietly. Legally." Sandra exhaled slowly. In that moment, she still didn't know if she was planning an escape or preparing an alibi. What she did know was that the story she thought she was living, the loyal daughter keeping the family legacy alive, wasn't her story anymore. They weren't just pushing her out. They were doing it slowly enough to keep using her silence for profit. It was a Thursday morning in early spring when everything finally clicked. The trees outside her office window had just started to bloom. Sandra remembered that detail clearly. Something about the fresh green leaves made what she discovered next feel even more stale. She had received her monthly credit summary, something she checked out of habit more than worry. But this time, a line caught her attention. Desmond Holdings, Deferred Payment Review. She hadn't seen that name in years. Desmond Holdings was a shell company Jacob Desmond once created for real estate investments. As far as she knew, it had been dormant. Curious, Sandra looked deeper. What she found wasn't surprising. It was worse. The $2.5 million expansion loan she had co-signed 2 years ago, the one used to launch Desmond Auto Air's new headquarters, was in arrears. 3 payments overdue. The business was barely surviving on grace periods and delayed payments to vendors. Her name was still on that loan, and it was being used in emails with creditors to buy more time. They used her clean credit history to gain goodwill, her untouched finances, her reputation as the reliable one. But Sandra hadn't seen a financial report in months. She hadn't been invited to a board meeting since last fall. The last time she asked Larry for an update, he replied with a winking emoji and a message. "No worries, sis. Big Vision is coming." But Vision didn't pay bills. She pulled up archived reports, reviewed invoices from the last 6 quarters, and compared current spending to the budgets she had created. That's when she saw it. Over $40,000 in consulting fees, all funneled through one of Larry's friends. Several entries for marketing testing had no actual campaigns behind them. Fleet repair costs had tripled, and vendor quotes had been signed using her initials. initials she never authorized. This wasn't mismanagement. It was deliberate. That same day, Sandra met with Gladys again, this time in person. They sat in a quiet booth at a coffee shop near the courthouse. Sandra showed her everything. Gladys read through the documents slowly, her lips pressed together, her eyes serious. When she reached the co-signed loan agreement, she paused. "You're not listed as a guarantor," she said. Sandra blinked. "Meaning what?" "Meaning," Gladys said, "they used your name to secure the loan. But you're not legally bound if you withdraw before they restructure." Sandra looked at her. "And if I do?" Gladys set down the papers and folded her hands. Then she said something Sandra would never forget. "You don't need to confront them. Don't warn them. Don't scream. Just move the brick holding up their wall. And let it fall." That evening, Sandra went home and opened the folder she had renamed. No longer Shadow Ledger. It was now called Redemption Plan. Inside were PDFs, flagged emails, account screenshots, and a draft letter that Gladys had helped her write weeks earlier, back when Sandra was still uncertain. She wasn't uncertain anymore. They hadn't just pushed her aside. They had used her until they believed she had nothing left to give. And maybe they were right. But Sandra still had one thing left to take back. Her name. It took 4 minutes. That's how long the portal stayed open after she logged in using the admin credentials she had created 2 years ago. Back when she still had full access. Back when she thought she was building something real. The screen flickered, then loaded a notice. Co-applicant status, active. Modification options available. She clicked remove. Then she uploaded the signed withdrawal letter she and Gladys had finalized 3 weeks earlier. Sandra entered her PIN. Then clicked submit. No alarms. No warning messages. Just a quiet note at the bottom of the screen. Update received. Processing pending compliance review. It was done. The next step for Sandra was risk control. She emailed the bank's loan manager, a man named Jerry Milo, someone she had worked with during the expansion phase. She attached a summary of financial discrepancies, vendor fraud, altered signatures, and her restricted access, which showed she had been excluded from internal decisions. Sandra was careful, clear, professional. What she didn't include was a warning. Within an hour, the bank froze the operating account tied to Desmond Holdings and began an internal review of the loan. Quietly. No call to Jacob. No message to Larry. Just a pause. One blinking cursor in their system where blind trust used to be. While they scrambled, she moved. Sandra contacted her personal accountant, Tracy James, someone she trusted since her graduate school years. Together, they reviewed her financial exposure and ran simulations on worst-case scenarios. Tracy confirmed what Gladys Perry had already said. No liability, no damage to her credit, and no legal obligation to inform them of her withdrawal. The trust Sandra had moved her savings into the previous month was protected. That night, for the first time in years, she left her phone on silent. And actually meant it. She slept. The next morning, when she woke up, there were already 32 missed calls. By mid-afternoon, there were 78 from her mother, 13 from her father, 7 from Larry, and 1 from a number she didn't recognize, until she played the voicemail. It was Gordon Maddox, their longtime company accountant. His voice was high-pitched, panicked, nearly cracking. "Sandra, call me now. This is serious. The loan's collapsing. The bank pulled support. We're at risk of default. You need to fix this. Do you hear me? You have to fix this." She listened to it twice. Not because she didn't understand, but because it sounded like justice. And justice, when it finally arrives, doesn't scream. It echoes. By early evening, Larry sent his first text. "What the hell did you do?" Then another. "You're overreacting. We could have handled this internally." But that word, we, no longer meant anything. There hadn't been a we in a long time. Later that night, her mother left a voicemail. Her voice wasn't angry, just quiet, trembling. "Sweetheart, what's happening? Your father says the bank froze everything, that they might recall the loan. Did you sign something?" Sandra did, but she didn't explain. She called her mother and let the phone ring twice. "I removed my name, that's all," she said. Her mother gasped softly. "But you can't just do that." "Actually, I can," Sandra replied. "And I did." There was a pause. "Sandra, this affects all of us." "No," she said calmly. "You made sure it didn't." And she hung up, not out of anger, but with a sense of completion. They had chosen the restaurant they used to visit for birthdays, Leona's. It had old brick walls, too many ceiling fans, and a private room near the fireplace where they had once clinked glasses and blown out candles. But this time there were no balloons. No cake. Just her parents, Jacob and Jane, sitting stiffly at one end of the table, and Larry, staring at his phone like this whole thing was beneath him. There was also an empty chair waiting for Sandra, as if they still believed she could be summoned. She arrived 15 minutes late, on purpose. She wore gray slacks and a button-down blouse. Neutral. Unreadable. Gladys had once told her. Power doesn't shout. It arrives without apology. Larry stood up when she walked in. Thanks for coming. I didn't come for you, Sandra said, slowly taking her seat. Let's not waste time. Jacob leaned forward, eyes locked on hers. You made your point loud and clear. No, she replied calmly. The bank made my point. I just stopped protecting your lie. His jaw tightened. Jane shifted in her seat. We're trying to hold this together, Jacob said. You think you're punishing us, Sandra, but you're punishing the legacy your grandfather built. She looked at him steadily. Grandpa built a garage. You turned it into a dictatorship. Larry scoffed. Oh, come on. We gave you everything. You gave me a job, she said, meeting his gaze. Not a voice. The silence that followed was thick, almost warm, like a room that had finally stopped pretending to be something it wasn't. Then Jane, her mother, spoke softly. What do you want, Sandra? That was the question, wasn't it? Not revenge. She had already taken that. What she wanted now was clarity. Sandra reached into her bag and placed a sealed envelope on the table. This is a signed affidavit confirming I've permanently withdrawn from the company loan, the board, and all business operations. You will never use my name again. Jacob opened his mouth, but she raised her hand. I'm not finished. She took a breath. I'm also submitting an anonymous tip to the state auditor. There are missing funds, unpaid vendors, payroll inconsistencies. She slid the envelope closer to him. It's your mess now. Fully. Legally. Larry's face turned red. You're destroying us over ego. I'm not destroying anything, Sandra said, rising from her seat. I'm just removing the illusion that I was ever part of it. She turned toward the door. Behind her, for the first time in her life, her father said the one word she never thought she'd hear. Sandra, please. She paused, not because she doubted herself, but because she was satisfied. You left me a voicemail telling me we were done, she said without turning around. I'm just agreeing with you formally. Then she walked away. The story made it into the papers. Not the major headlines. Just a quiet piece in a local business digest. Desmond Ottawa faces financial turmoil amid internal disputes. Sandra didn't leak it, but she knew exactly who did. 2 days later, Gladys called Sandra. Her voice was half serious, half smiling. When people lose power, she said, they look for someone to blame. They just didn't expect that person to have already walked away. After that, the voicemails turned sharp. From Jacob Desmond. You ungrateful child. We built that business for you. You're ruining your future. From Larry. You think you're clever, but you'll need us someday. From Gordon Maddox, the accountant. Do you even understand what this means? You've destroyed their legacy. But here was the truth, what none of them dared to say out loud. They had already destroyed it long before Sandra pulled out. They destroyed it when they used her name, but denied her a seat at the table. When they saw her not as a daughter, but a threat. When they made her invisible. Now the loan was falling apart. The accounts were frozen. Vendor contracts were coming undone. And Sandra? She was untouched. No legal problems. No damage to her finances. Her credit remained clean. Her savings protected. She forwarded the last voicemail to Gladys, then deleted the rest. Sandra took her phone off silent, and for the first time in years, it stayed quiet. No emergencies. No demands. No fires only she could put out. She moved into a small loft in downtown Portland. It wasn't fancy, just clean. Sunlight through the windows. Space for a desk. And finally, peace. Sandra began consulting again, quietly helping small, women-led startups avoid the same traps she had once lived through. Not because she needed purpose. She already had it. 3 months later, an envelope arrived at her new address. No return name. Just the bank's logo and a tracking barcode. Inside was a single sheet of paper. This letter confirms that the commercial loan associated with Sandra Desmond has been formally withdrawn and restructured. No further obligation remains. No action required. No thank you. No apology. No spin. Just a line drawn in ink in law, and finally, in truth. Sandra placed the letter in a folder marked complete and slid it into the back of a cabinet. That night, she lit a candle by the window. The loft was quiet. The city below hummed, unaware, alive. She thought of that voicemail one last time. Don't bother coming to the reunion. We're cutting ties. They had wanted silence, obedience, absence, and they got all three. What they didn't expect was that Sandra would thrive inside that silence, that she would build something, not out of revenge, but out of truth. She poured a glass of wine, opened a new client file, and wrote one line at the top. You're not difficult. You're just finally visible. And then she kept going.